how does an autonomous system, which is not programmed or trained when it's machine learning, when trained in such situation, handle this? That's a fascinating question. The long, heavy, long tail is too heavy and too long. Today, we have an amazing, distinguished guest that I cannot say how excited I am to have you. We have Philip Koopman. Welcome to the Autonomous Vehicle Safety and Security Podcast.
Thanks for having me on.
So here are several things you definitely should know about Philip. First of all, Philip is the only person, to the best of my knowledge, on this planet Earth who can say he has been working on autonomous vehicle safety more than 25 years. Philip, that's a statement I can say that nobody can make other than you. You're the only person. So that's number one.
I'm surprised I can make that statement, but here
All right, that's number one. Number two, UL 4600 is a autonomous safety standard, which is like 300-page standard by now. It's got pretty mature. Philip is the key, not only the key contributor, he's the originator of that, and he has, among with many other contributors, of course, he has large contribution in this standard. So how many people can say that? That's another thing that gives me goosebumps. Finally, there's always, it just gets better. It just gets better. The third one is even better. He was a Cold War combat veteran. So he drove U.S. Navy submarines. Philip, were you also in charge of the safety of the submarine?
Well, everyone's kind of in charge of safety because it's a small steel tank with 100 of your best friends in it, and you have to look out for each other. But as an example, for part of my time there, I was in charge of making sure we had enough oxygen to breathe.
Wow,
so I'm going to say there's some safety.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So Philip is currently engaged in Carnegie Mellon University, where he teaches embedded systems, safety, and many other courses. And I can't stop. I mean, all of these are important. The way I got in touch with Philip is I read his book, one of his books. He wrote quite a few books. So my favorite one is How Safe is Safe Enough. Philip, do you want to show the book?
Sure. Here we go.
So that's the book. I recommend all my audience to read this book. This is an amazing book. As far as autonomous vehicle safety books are concerned, this is one of the must-haves. So you'll get a lot of insights from this. Philip, I think I could go on and on and on. I would give it over to you to tell our audience a little bit about. I want to start with the book. What inspired you writing this book, and why did you write this book? How safe is safe enough is a provocative question in itself. Let's talk about it.
I got into that because I was doing self-driving car safety. We did a standard, and one of the things when we were discussing with the committee of the standard is the standard does not actually set a bar for how safe is safe enough. We realized that was going to just be a tar pit that we didn't want to get involved with. So it says you have to figure out what safe enough means. And given that you know that answer, here's how to make sure your autonomous vehicle is safe enough. So we sort of punted on that, but that was the right decision because you shouldn't standardize things when you're just guessing, right? So we
Absolutely.
said externally we said that, and it's to a large degree at the time I would have said it was a social question. Engineers shouldn't be the ones telling everyone else how much risk they're required to take. There's a social contribution, right? So I looked at it that way. And since then, I've actually spent quite a lot of time digging deeper on it. And this book was a byproduct of maybe the first phase, the technical phase. And now I'm into I'm a co-author on a law journal paper. I never thought that would happen. Okay. So it just keeps evolving. So we can start with the book, and then we can talk about the scope that goes even beyond the book. The book is not obsolete. The book's still all in force. It's the technical part, and then there's a legal policy part that goes that you build the book on top of the book.
I actually quote you verbatim in many of my talks where you are, I'm paraphrasing it now, where you would try to define how safe is safe enough, and you you say, you pose actually more questions than answers. Like, is it can we say if it is somehow safer than a human,
Well,
then
and
it's
people
safe
love
enough.
that. People
People
always
love
say,
that.
"Oh, safer than human, I'm done." And
I'm
there's
done.
two answers. The
Under
first
what
answer,
condition?
well, the first answer is in the book, and the second answer is beyond the book. So the big one is, well, which human, where, when, driving what vehicle, and by the time you dig, you end up with like 250 pages of book, and you just sort of getting warmed up.
Yeah, you're just getting warmed out. So
Yeah,
you don't really have the answer. So under what condition are we talking about?
yeah.
The should we compare with the human? So if bluntly, in Germany, we have 3,500 fatalities due to road accident. So if we can bring it down to 1,000 on a net, we have a gain. But the thing is, uh, every life matters, right? For the victim of the family of the victim of those 1,000, they don't care. That for them it's not safe. And what we see today is like the fatalities in autonomous vehicle is overly hyped. It's like the massive media focus. They're not talking about the 3,500 deaths, but if there's
No,
a big event,
I would argue, it isn't overly hyped. Not at all.
not at all. Tell
Not
me.
at all. Okay, so let me back up just a second to if you will, let's spend a little bit on why it's such a complicated question. Then I for sure want to go to the hype, but you have to understand the background first. Okay, so in the U.S., our fatality rate per mile or per kilometer, take your pick. I'm going to go miles because I'm American. We all know how to multiply and divide by 1.6. But the fatality rate per mile is about twice as bad as it is in countries like Germany. The US is just twice as dangerous. Ballpark, these are all round numbers. We can look them up in detail. But the US is astoundingly dangerous for road travel compared to the other countries. And it didn't used to be that way. Back in the 1980s, they weren't that different, and the other countries got better, and the US has been lagging behind to the point where we're really quite dangerous. So, which car where? Well, a German car on average is way safer than the US car to begin with. And then there's other issues about what kind of road you're on and which city you live in, because some roads are dangerous. In the US, per kilometer per mile, it's a factor of more than 3 difference in fatality rates, depending which state you live in. And there's some zip codes postal codes are even worse. Okay.
Wow.
And in Pennsylvania, the safest road is the big limited access highway, Pennsylvania Turnpike, and that's always under construction. They're always putting in safety improvements. They use it as a test bed, and that's 5 times safer than the rural roads right next to it. 5 times, okay? So when we talk about which road where, I mean, we're not talking 10% here. We're talking huge multipliers. Day versus night, urban versus rural, driver age. People say old drivers are dangerous. Well, that's not really true. I'd rather see a 70-year-old than than an 18-year-old, because there's another factor 2, 3, 4 there. It's all over the place. So I just want to get people to understand when I'm talking about which driver where, we're talking factors of 2, 3, 5, 10. We're not talking 10s and 20s or percents. So establishing the baseline is huge. Okay. Now, when you see, it used to be the companies would compare themselves against national average, but they'd be driving in an easy city. Well, then it means nothing, right? More recently, they've been comparing themselves against the same city. So the companies are comparing San Francisco against San Francisco, but at least one of the studies used ride-hail drivers as a baseline who have a lot of 20-something males driving leased cars. I mean, how's that going to turn out? So even setting the baseline is hard. But if you want to get to the numbers about the media makes a big deal, right now the industry has, these companies, and you have to count the driver out miles because of the driver in, the driver intervenes when they need to, okay? So if you count the driver out miles, we're talking 5 or 10 million miles per company, something like that. And in the US, 5 to 10 million miles. Waymo's last report was 7 million miles. So let's say they're about 10 ballpark, okay? And in the US, in a city like San Francisco, depending on the year, because it varies again by like 25% depending, but ballpark round number, it's 1 fatality per 100 million miles.
for a
for in the
autonomous
US, for a human driver, in
for
a
a human
human
driver,
driver,
one
one
fatality per
fatality
100
per
million miles.
100 million miles,
Got it.
including the drunk drivers.
Including the drunk drivers and
If you
all
take
the
out the
dividers you
drunk,
mentioned.
if you take out all the people that the robo car people say, well, humans are bad actors, not entirely true. There's a lot of hype in that. But if you take them out, let's call it 200 million miles. And it's actually really hard to do that math, but it's not 100, it's way more. Okay, so I'm going to stay with 100, which includes the drunk drivers, all right? Just to keep it, because I know that number. And they've gone maybe 10. Well, they're expected to have killed 0 people at this point, right?
Yeah.
You know, their budget, so to speak. I mean, these are people. And so as an engineer, I have to talk in numbers, but you have to be mindful they're people. But their budget is 0.1 people. And Waymo, not sorry, Waymo. So let me start again. So Uber already killed someone in testing, although you could say that's somehow different. But Cruise ran over this woman, and it was literally a matter of inches, a few inches, and they probably would have killed her because her head wasn't under the rear wheel, but her legs were, and she was under the, so it was a matter of inches that they didn't kill her. And they're at what, 5 million miles? 95 million more to go. So anyone who says that these things are safer,
has no clue what they're talking about.
Well, it's a little more sophisticated than that, because I want to be fair, but saying it's proven they're safer, no, it's not. 90 more million miles to go. Now, for the Cruise mishap, they kept saying, look how safe we are, look how safe we are, look how safe we are. Then they had that mishap. And what happened was the mishap revealed a bunch of holes in their capability to be safe, that to be sure, human drivers aren't perfect, but that was awfully early to have. And it wasn't, we can go into that if you want. It wasn't the initial impact that was the problem. It's that after the vehicle stopped, it decided to drag the poor woman down the street and run over her. So that was the part a human driver probably would not have done. I mean, yes, somebody gets thrown in front of you, it's hard to stop. Actually, I could have stopped, different discussion. But the real issue was that after they stopped, they decided to go with someone under the car. Okay. And so them saying they had data showing they were safer. They said, oh, look at us, we're safer than human drivers. And then that happened and it proved them incorrect. Well, how can that be? Well, they were extrapolating from 5 million miles out to stuff that takes 1 billion miles to really prove statistically. Okay, so now Waymo, where's Waymo? Well, they're at 7 or 10 million miles. And they say, well, based on, now they have very sophisticated stuff, but the bottom line is based on maybe 10 million miles ballpark, based on property damage and low severity crashes, we extrapolate we're safer. But it's not time for them to have seen a severe injury or fatality. And so it's an extrapolation. And we found out that Cruise's extrapolations were wrong. Waymo claims their extrapolations are valid. We'll see.
We'll see. They have
We'll
still
see.
90
90 more million to go. And even then, actually for 95% confidence, you need like 300 million miles with no fatalities. But by then you probably have one, which means you need, so you end up at 1 billion miles to get statistical confidence. And I certainly hope they're safer. And it would be accurate for them to say, we have confidence and we predict we're safer and we're on track. But that's different than claiming victory. It's like I'm running a marathon, I'm 1.5 miles in, my splits look great, time for gold medal. It's like, no, you got to finish the rest of the marathon.
Wow, that is mind blowing. We're, statistically, we're way. There's a long.
We're just not there yet. Yeah,
we're just not there yet.
Does the press fixate on these? Well, yeah, they do, right? But that doesn't change the statistics, right? So you have to decide.
Absolutely. What I was going to say, I mean, after this, I think this argument does not hold anymore. What I was going to say that whenever there's one fatality using like the Waymos and stuff, we're all over TV. But when we are like 3,500 fatalities, none of them are in media, right? So
and that's a shame. That's a shame. We should be doing more for road safety, to be clear. But saying, well, all these people get killed on normal stuff, so you should ignore when we harm someone because all those other people. It's like, no,
that's not the right argument.
That's not a good argument either.
That's not a
good
argument.
Both matter. some people say, well, I fixate on this. Well, that's because it's my specialty. I actually spend time on other road safety. The U.S. National Safety Council has a group on mobility safety, and I volunteer time on that. And they deal with scooters and public transit, all these other aspects of safety. And I'm the autonomy guy on all these urban mobility folks. I'm there to represent autonomy, and I donate time there because it actually matters. And so it all matters. But when you have, in the US, there's like almost a car for every person or something. And that's a lot of cars. And guess what? When you have 100 or 200 autonomous vehicles, the other cars are going to have a lot more accidents just because there's so many of them. But when you do the math, 100 million miles between fatalities, I'd rather it be more, but that's still a lot of miles.
That's a lot of miles. Now, let's go to the technicality a little bit.
Yeah.
So clearly, from what you've just told, we're not even close. Why do you think
to be clear, we're not close to knowing?
We're not even close to knowing.
Not close to knowing. And some companies have shown they have more work to do. Other companies, we don't have enough to judge. Some companies will say, look at us, our track record's great. And the answer is good so far, lots more to go. So the jury's still out.
So,
but that matters for the following reason, because we have pressure on political pressure to make decisions as if it's proven they're safe.
Now let's talk about the technicality. Yeah. So to say, just for the sake of it, 100 million mile data would let us know if it is safe enough or not.
But that's only like 70% confidence. But okay, we can go with that, right?
Yeah, only 75%. 75%.
Well, at 100 million miles, if there've been no fatalities, we start getting a pretty good feeling.
Fair enough.
Fair enough. That we're in the ballpark. Okay, fair enough.
We're in the ballpark. Now, well, we're like you gave examples of. I mean, we all already had fatality in 5 million miles. So why?
Well, to be clear, the cruise incident was a severe injury, not a fatality. The woman survived. Some people get that wrong. I want everyone to know.
Yeah.
He survived, but it was very close.
It was very close. Now
they got cruise and the woman got lucky, is what it boils down to.
Technically, what are the challenges?
There are so many, right? I mean, how many tens of billions of dollars have been spent? This is not an easy problem. I'll get a technical challenge in a moment, but let me do the high-level challenge. The high-level challenge is you have a 25-year problem that's being funded by 5-year funding horizons. VCs like the return in 5 years, and this is, well, look, I'll make this concrete. In 1995, right before I became a safety guy, for autonomous vehicles, Carnegie Mellon University ran a car from across the U.S., like more than 2,000 miles, 98% hands off the wheel. 98% all the way to California. And the alums of that program, so I joined right after that, they decided they needed a safety person. So they brought me on. And after that, what we say is, hey, for 25 years, we've been working on that last 2%. And that 2% isn't going to be solved this year either. It's going to be a long, long process. So if you have folks funding this who are looking for 2, 3, 4-year returns, they're going to be disappointed, because scaling this up to a national size fleet is a multi-decade thing. And so that's the first hard problem is the demand for immediate returns on something that's just going to take a long time. So that's the first one. The next one, which is more technical, which is the big one I always go after, is that machine learning is good for like 99%, right? 99% is pretty darn good for machine learning. And safety is 99.9999. I'm not going to count out the nines. A lot of nines percent.
A lot of nines.
And so I'll go to these workshops where the machine learning folks will say, hey, we're doing 98%, 99% on this. And it is objectively amazing and really good work and really cool. It's amazing technology, because without it, these cars wouldn't drive at all. So my respect to them for doing that. But the safety guys are in the back row saying, cool, 7 more nines to go. And each 9 is 10 times harder, and that's the fundamental issue. In the way it manifests is that, testing doesn't prove out that you can't test that many 9s. Now we're back to the 100 million miles problem, right? This is just how that shows up. But it gets even worse. And the reason it gets worse is that people talk about long tail problems. Here's a weird thing, right? The long tail, the distribution, you have the long tails out at the edges, okay? And safety is limited by the long tails. But it's even worse. There's a thing called a heavy tail distribution where a lot of the area under the curve is way out at the end. And there's every sign that this is a heavy tail problem. And what that means is, let's say you see something every 100 miles. Let's say you say a weird thing happens every 1,000,000 miles, okay? And you fix it. And you go another 1,000,000 miles, and you see another weird thing. It isn't that it's happening every 1,000,000 miles because you have to be 100 times better, right? It isn't that it's happening every 1,000,000 miles. The question is how many things are happening. If it's always a different thing and you fix it, it doesn't help you because the next one will be something else that's different. And so if there's a near infinite number of things that almost never happen, and machine learning learns by being trained on things you've seen happen, when does that process end?
Never.
So that's
the heavy long tail problem.
Yeah, it's a heavy long tail problem. There's a huge collection of rare things. And the question is, how long will it take the industry to do enough of the rare things that the ones they haven't done are rare enough that they're safer than a human driver? And thus far, you still see crazy things probably on social media about, look at what this weird thing happened, and it's because they weren't trained on it. And until that stops, it's really hard to say these things are done.
100% is super mind-blowing. Now I want to quote two people here, actually three. So our former chancellor, Angela Merkel, she's a scientist, right? And she said something amazing about autonomous vehicle. What she said, I think a couple of years back when she was still the chancellor, that in 20 years, every human being will need a special license to drive, special permission or reason to drive. Why are you driving? So autonomous vehicle will be so prevalent in our society. That's one.
That didn't turn out, did it?
I mean, we're still waiting. It's not yet 20 years. So
it's not going to turn out.
It's not going to turn out. So yeah. One thing that did not turn out for sure, by 2020, Elon Musk wanted to have level 4. Or did he even say level 5? I don't quite remember that, but he
makes that promise every year.
Yeah, so didn't happen. What really resonates with me is the previous ex-CEO of Waymo, John Kharkiv, when he said that there will never be an autonomous vehicle that we can drive in every condition. I think his statement sounded more resonating to what I feel, and definitely what you're talking about. What's your take on these three things?
I've been saying that for years, and it's because it doesn't make economic sense anytime soon to do that.
Yeah, it doesn't make economic sense.
Yeah.
So I think in that way, we will probably be seeing generations of it. The first generation probably geo-fenced, inside a lane, autonomous lane. How do you see the future? How do you see the autonomous vehicle deployment happening, the evolution of autonomous deployment?
Well, it depends what you mean by autonomous vehicle. And I'm not being too clever there. This is really the case.
It's really the question.
I will guarantee if you travel at all, you've probably ridden on a level 4 autonomous vehicle without thinking about it. If you go into many of the airports, the international airports, they have little shuttles at the airport.
True.
And some of them are elevators, and some of them are rubber-wheeled vehicles, people movers.
Yeah.
100% automated.
Okay? 100%.
And I've actually worked on both elevators and people movers, looking at safety on those things. And the ones with the rubber wheels, it's not rails, it's rubber wheels on concrete tracks. If you take a look, that's all computer controlled. But the reason they can do, and they follow international safety standards. Both of them follow international safety standards for elevators or for rail or for whatever. And the reason they're safe is because people aren't allowed on the tracks, right? It's a very controlled environment. They go back and forth. Back for right, and the one at San Francisco Airport actually has switches, and it took them a while to get all that sorted out, but they did. But it's treated like a rail system. So those things are safe because they follow safety standards and because they're very limited environments. right now, autonomous vehicles, there's no company that will say publicly, unequivocally, that they conform to automotive safety standards other than the ones the US government requires, which have nothing to do with computers. So they're not doing that. Now, they may be doing it internally, but none of them will commit, yes, in fact, we conform to this standard. So that's a problem. The other problem is that they don't have a constrained environment. They're in an open environment. And that just makes it much harder. Now you can say, all right, we're going to go to specific low-speed tracks in specific areas that are low risk, and you get the low-speed shuttle crowd doing that. And that is something you can make work because you're going slow enough. Jamming on the brakes is a viable option. Make sure everyone's wearing seatbelts. There have been incidents, right? And also you're not operating in crazy areas and you know the place inside out and a bunch of other things. So that's going to happen. You see robo-taxis in cities, but you're still seeing lots of unexpected things because just it's a city, stuff happens, right? You could conceive of dedicated lanes. There's some automated intermodal truck transport that's been running for decades in Europe and a couple places. So you can automate something if you understand the environment. But when you try an unconstrained environment, that's where you get into trouble. So how long will it take? Well, I think the scaling is going to take longer than anyone is prepared to believe. And it's because of we're back to the heavy tail. Every time you run into something you didn't know about and didn't design for, you roll the dice on whether something bad happens, and you have to design for it. And if you expand faster than you fix the loose ends, you end up with where crews ended up. Because it wasn't just the pedestrian dragging. They hit a fire truck. They had all sorts of incidents. They took a corner too tight and it wiped out the back end of the car. They were, by all appearances, they were expanding faster than they were able to clean up the loose ends. And so that's another reason why I think this technology will take a long time to scale up, because you can't say, all right, 100 cars is perfect, time for 1 million. Well, guess what? At 1 million cars, you're going to see the weird stuff that never happened to 100. You're going to see that every day on 1 million cars.
Absolutely. I really like the heavy tail, heavy long tail theory that it's gonna take we don't even know what we don't know. In an ISO standard, we call it unknown.
That's what it ends up. The rare stuff that hasn't happened yet is
the rare stuff that hasn't happened
There's
yet.
a friend of mine who likes to say, I'll do a variant. It's like, well, you may forget about the heavy tail, but it won't forget about you.
You won't forget about you. And if you think about, us, like human, we learn, we kind of like we go to driving school, we learn how to drive, and it's the heavy tail learning. You keep
well, there's two things there. There's two things there. To be sure, young drivers are much more dangerous than old drivers, and some of that is immaturity of judgment. Some of it is they just haven't seen stuff, right?
They haven't seen stuff.
But the other thing is there's a bunch of stuff that happens to drivers that we weren't trained for, we've never seen before, but we still get right. And part of that is when you say, well, there's a driving test and a driver license. Well, the most important, the most impactful, if I can use that word in safety, you have to be careful. The most impactful thing in driver's license is none of the stuff you're thinking. It's the birth certificate saying you're a human being with 16 years of figuring out what happens next in unstructured situations. That's actually the thing that matters most. I'll give you an example. I was driving down the street and there was a woman talking to someone in a car standing in the street, but next to a parked car. And in the center of the street, there was a dog standing on 2 legs facing away from her. Like, you don't see that every day, right? And I correctly figured out, I deduced, because you couldn't see anything, it was just a dog standing on 2 legs, that I'll bet she has one of those retractable leashes with a thin wire that I can't see and the dog's straining against the wire. And so I slowed down. If I hadn't done that, I would have dragged both of them down the street.
Wow.
And sure enough, that's what it was. But the only way for me to know that was by saying, gee, dog on 2 legs, that doesn't look right. I think I must know what's happening. It's the first time I've seen that. It's probably the last time I'll ever see that, right? Yeah. But I've seen retractable leashes before, right? In completely different contexts. I understand that most dogs don't go around walking on 2 legs. I noticed that her hand was stretched out behind her like she was holding a weight. I deduced it. And so that's a thing humans, they're not perfect to be sure, but humans are amazing at stuff like that. And machine learning struggles with things it hasn't been taught. And unless someone has heard that story and decided to program it in from me, I'll bet none of the systems know how to do that.
Wow. So I want to talk about one of my experiences. Now that we're talking, I remember one winter, all of a sudden started snowing, and in one of the I was in one of the one of the roads where my vehicle was just got slippery. I never had that experience. I knew how to manage. I knew how to do it, and probably the cars behind or next to me were seeing something is happening. Nothing happened. How does an autonomous system, which is not programmed or trained when it's machine learning, when trained in such situation, handle this? That's a fascinating question. The long tail is too heavy and too long.
That's, well, too heavy and too long to succumb to the weight of $100 billion. Interesting question. We're going to find out, right? But yeah, some of this, there's another aspect that's very hard. In traditional computer-based system safety, which has been around for decades now, when they talk about what does safe mean, it says, well, it's going to be safe in intended operating conditions. And why do you do that? Well, there's a human operator who decides when to turn it off and not use it anymore. And so a lot of the safety argument is loaded on the human operator to not use it irresponsibly. Caution, and apparently this is an urban myth, but caution, do not hold up your lawnmower in your hands and use it as a hedge trimmer. You're not supposed to do that. Apparently nobody actually did lose their fingers. That's an urban myth, but it's a great, very evocative, right? You're stupid, don't do that. Okay. Well, when you have an autonomous vehicle, who's the person who's supposed to tell it to not drive in the snow? It has to figure it out. So not only does it have to know how to do all the stuff it's designed for, it has to know how to determine it's in over its head. And that turns out to be very difficult. In particular, if it's encountering something it hasn't been trained on, how does it know it hasn't been trained on it?
Wow. Wow.
So it's not only, it doesn't know, it's a lot of work to teach it the heavy tail, but putting in a detector to saying, by the way, you may think that's an X or you may think that's the Y, but it's really a Z that you never even knew existed. And deducing that, and sure, you can apply machine learning to that, but now you have 2 nines, you need a bunch more nines, right? But this is another limit. Another limit is just knowing that you've exceeded your intended operational design domain, ODD, in a way that was not foreseen by the people who taught you what your ODD was.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, detecting whether I'm in ODD or not. What you're like the Mercedes did something very clever. Designed their ODD for the Autobahn, German Autobahn, where there is no opposite traffic and all those. What do you think?
Not supposed to be. That's the operative.
Not supposed to be.
That's the operative word here. Yeah.
Yeah. So what do you think of that? I mean, in my opinion, what I see is, whether am I in the ideal ODD, I shouldn't use the word ideal, let's just say ODD or not, who decides that?
It can get remote support, but it has to know when to ask for remote support. So you've just sort of deferred the problem by one level. It's like, well, a person can help it out. Well, unless you have a person supervising it the whole time, in which case it's not autonomous, how does it know when to ask for help? Well, it has to know it's in trouble. But we just said the hard problem was knowing that it's in trouble. So it didn't really solve it. So the Autobahn is interesting. Well, it's hard because of the speeds. The perception problem is really hard because you have to look so far ahead. But it's a simplified environment, is what you're arguing.
Yeah, but they also limited the speed.
Okay, that helps too. But so it's a simplified environment, simplified environmental operating conditions. That always helps because you're hoping that the heavy tail gets thinned out to the point that you can sort of brute force it and get all the situations. And you might well be as safe as a human driver in a very constrained environment, in good weather, not in heavy traffic, not on a holiday, probably not on a holiday trip down to Italy for the holidays. Maybe not. Maybe you don't want to do that.
Absolutely, Philip. Right? I want to transition a little bit to you before we started. You were talking about going beyond the book, right?
Yeah,
So you did a lot of work after you've written this book. I want to talk a little bit about that because,
sure.
yeah, let's just start there. What's beyond safe is safe enough?
Well, the book, it sort of gets at this, but it doesn't really dive deep. Because the purpose of the book was to explain when people say safe as a human, they have no idea how hard that is. And so part of the book is just saying, you're signing up for safe as a human, you have no idea what you just signed up for. It's just incredibly complicated. But even if you are net statistically as safe as a human, you still have to understand what it means to do other things. And this kind of is in the book. It gets at it, but not with a lot of detail. That different people mean different thing by safe. When you ask 5 people what safe means, you get like 7 answers, right? If they're honest, right? So you have to decide what you mean by safe, and it isn't one of them, it's all of them. And
Yeah.
I'll give you some examples that I think are particularly relevant of the all of them that sort of been my work afterwards. And these are hypothetical examples. I'm not saying any company would do this, but I want to make them a little extreme to make the point, okay? So let's say that the number of fatalities was cut in half. Half the fatalities. Well, safer than human, that's a win, right? But what if
Yeah.
every single fatality was a pedestrian? All of them. And so in the US, that would be more than doubling the number of pedestrian fatalities and no one else is killed.
Wow.
Pedestrians are not going to be happy about this, right?
Absolutely.
And so there's the whole concept of risk redistribution. It's probably not okay to redistribute risk
To someone else.
to someone else, even if the net numbers go down.
Yeah.
That's probably not okay. So
we
that's a
got
constraint. So you have to be safer, but there are constraints, and that there's a few others, but that's one of the big constraints is it's not okay to heap risk on, especially people who are not benefiting from the technology. It's not okay to heap risk on the people who are not inside the car, even if the whole numbers go down. That's going to be a problem for you socially.
That's going to be a problem for sure. And also, when you said 100 million is the benchmark, you said that includes the drunk drivers.
Right. And
So,
maybe you want to be safer than a drunk driver. What do you think?
yeah, I mean, we should we not exclude the drunk driver because this is the biggest argument. Hey, a software will not drunk drive.
Right, right. So you can easily argue that the benchmark should be higher, and that isn't in the book. That you may want to argue the benchmark's quite a bit higher because why would you want to include the misbehaving drivers you're supposed to be better than, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But another way this shows up that's like that in the things beyond the book, beyond this. So that's about the statistics, right? But there's risk redistribution. There's also bad behavior. So there's the concept of driver negligence, liability, things like that. And without making this into a legal show, because I'm not a lawyer.
Neither am I.
Yeah, let's just give a concrete example. Let's say that your self-driving car has been taught to roll through stop signs and roll through red lights. Now, there was actually a recall on a famous company for
absolutely
intentionally programming the cars to do this, all right? And you could say, oh, but we're such smart engineers, we would never hurt anyone. Does that make it okay? No. But what happens if you have a car, and this is hypothetical, and the fatalities go down by a factor of 10? But every single fatality was rolling through a red light or a stop sign and hitting a pedestrian. Now, that's extreme, to be sure. I'm just making the point. That's not okay behavior, right?
Right.
So one of the takeaways from the whole liability discussion is if you are a super safe driver, you don't get free kills. You're not allowed to be irresponsible because on average you're safe. You still have to be a responsible driver regardless of your safety record. You don't get free outs. You don't get free whatever, so free passes, okay? And so another constraint, not only are you not allowed to redistribute risk because that's socially unacceptable, but you're not allowed to drive recklessly even if you argue, but I will save lives by doing that, you're still not allowed to do it. That's against the law. You have legal constraints. And especially in the US, you have tort liability. You could have criminal, so, who goes to jail when that happens? That's an interesting question. Not that every crash someone goes to jail, but if you clearly recklessly break traffic laws and kill someone, well, if it's a human driver, they're at risk of going to jail. What's the deal for autonomous vehicles? So another constraint is you need to be well behaved with respect to traffic rules, road rules. And I know there's exceptions, and I know there's cases where you have to break the law to do the right thing. I get all that, right? It's like, well, you may have to, you may have to get out of the way of an ambulance, even though technically you're breaking some traffic infraction. I get all that, right? And in practice, was the human driver acting reasonably? And so these things have to act reasonably. But that's another constraint. And the engineers complain, but you're constraining me. I can't save as many lives. That may be, but it's still a constraint. You can't ignore the social constraints. So that's another one.
Got it. Got it. Fascinating. So I wanna ask a philosophical question. I mean, I can't help asking you this. Like, we've been actually talking about how difficult it is for us to build an AI system which is even close to a human, where we make so much of a mistake, right? And the anecdotal example that you gave, that you made, although you've never seen that situation, you made a judgment. I gave an example how I managed to, on a slippery, icy road condition for the first time in my life, how the others in the road helped. Now, why are we so much better or so much different than AI? And if we are, why do we fear AI so much? There is a mega hype that AI is dangerous. It's going to take over everything from us. So what is the difference between these two, or what? Why should we fear, or should we not fear?
I'm not going to get into the Terminator Skynet discussion. It's not my thing. But I think part of what's going on is that people are attributing more to these AI systems than is really there.
Yeah.
And actually, in ways, that's the problem. People love to say, well, my car thinks this and my car thinks that. Your car doesn't think. It's making statistical decisions, right? It does not understand what's going on unless some person has intentionally programmed in some understanding logic, which happens all the time to fill up the gaps in the pieces. It doesn't think. It's an inference engine. It does these statistical correlations. People are very prone to projecting human characteristics, anthropomorphizing objects that behave as though they have volition, right? And so a lot of it's there. People say, well, my car thought this and did this. It's like, well, I bet you can't find lines of code that made it do that. And I bet that you could disprove that by putting in a slightly different situation and it behaves completely differently. Because it wasn't reacting the way you thought it was.
I can't help actually, rephrasing the question to make it even more provocative. So many times this statement has been made by a lot of people that for the first time in human history, and we've been superior species because of our brain right here. That's the only thing that we have superior. Now, for the first time in history, we have created something where our brain, our intelligence, at least our IQ will have no relevance, because that thing that we have created will be doing far better than this. We'll be doing far better than in science, mathematics. I'm talking about the LLM models, or we're going toward artificial general AI. There is a huge pragmatism from artificial intelligence community that we're getting there, and there is a huge dogma, fear among the society at large. Politicians are talking about it, that this is dangerous. But now that we are trying to solve a relatively simple problem for a human being, which is driving, we see the heavy long tail problem, the almost infinitely many, the heavy tail goes on and on and on. Why is it so? Is it because of our consciousness? Why is it so that we're better, but at the same time there is a fear?
Well, we have the ability to reason about things, to ask what if about ill-structured situations, and machine learning technology is good at interpolation, but not so great at extrapolation. We're pretty good at extrapolation. But if you want to ask, it's just to react to your statement about, this is the one. Do you remember expert systems? Rule-based
do.
systems
I do.
and people with expertise were all gonna get put in a jar when they retired, and there would be no need for experts anymore because the computers would do all the thinking for us. Do you remember that?
I remember that.
I didn't notice that happened, right?
Yeah, good point. Good point.
So this is, I mean, I've been around long enough to see wave after wave of AI hype, and this is for sure a wave of AI hype. Now, rule-based systems were still used successfully in some limited situations. I'm sure they're still out there now. The current stuff we have has value, but it's completely overhyped and being used in all these ridiculous situations for which it's obviously unfit. And so I'm just going to wait for the hype to die down and find out what they're really good for, which is, only a few handful of percents of what everyone's claiming they're good for, and we'll see. There's no reason to believe they have general intelligence. I know there are people argue, and we'll probably get hate comments on this, but I don't see it. If I'm proven wrong, well, my response to that is strong claims require strong evidence, and we haven't seen the evidence yet.
Absolutely. And would you also, you said our reasoning makes us special, our capable of reasoning. Would you also put the human intuition in the game? Like, intuitively you felt something when you saw.
That's part of it is we have this ability, and again, not being a cognitive scientist, this is not going to be precise. We have an ability to reason about things we haven't seen, to fall back on general principles. But some of it is we have a very finely tuned detector to realize I don't know what's going on, so I think I'll be slowing down until I figure it out. And what I've seen in machine learning is tremendous false confidence. We throw something at it, we know it's a curveball, and it's like, oh, I got this, and it's just making it up as it goes.
Wow. So to sum it up, I would take three things from today's talk. First of all, the heavy long tail problem, the autonomous vehicle safety problem is a heavy long tail safety problem. Second is we are far, far, far from fully autonomous vehicle, which is safe.
Fully autonomous anywhere, anytime, any road.
Anywhere.
Decades.
Third, we're also far, far, far away from artificial general intelligence.
And I have limited opinions about that, but I don't see it. And you can ask other guests who are in the thick of that thing, but feels like a hype wave to me, and I've seen a few of them. So there you go.
Fantastic. Philip, thank you so much for joining us. This conversation has been amazing. So thank you so much again.
Well, thanks for having me.
Thank you, everyone, for watching this episode. If you have questions, comments, or anything you'll want to ask me or even Philip, write in the comment. I will be more than happy to answer your questions. And Philip, we hope to see you again because this talk has been amazing. We definitely should do more of these episodes.
Great. Happy to do that.
Thank you.